Let us now come to urgent questions. We start with Anthony Mangnall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State to make a statement on the UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement scrutiny.
Mr. Speaker, I have been asked to reply. Our Anglo-Australian trade deal will play an important role in levelling up the United Kingdom. It is expected to increase trade with Australia by 53%, boost the economy by £2.3 billion and add £900 million to the wages of hard-working households across our country in the long run. Her Majesty's Government has stated on a number of occasions that the agreement will be ratified only once it has passed its statutory scrutiny period under the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, and in addition, the necessary implementing legislation must have passed. Her Majesty's Government has made extensive additional scrutiny commitments, which include allowing, Mr. Speaker, a reasonable amount of time for the select committees to produce reports prior to the statutory scrutiny period under CRAG. We further set out that for the Australia deal, this would be a period of at least 3 months. In actual fact, Mr. Speaker, double the amount of time has now been provided. The agreement has been available for scrutiny for over 6 months. I should point out also, Mr. Speaker, before starting CRAG, Her Majesty's Government published 2 reports to support scrutiny. The Independent Trade and Agriculture Committee's report on the 13th of April, and the Government's own report under Section 42 of the Agriculture Act on the 6th of June. Both reports were provided to the relevant select committees prior to the publication to support their scrutiny work. Her Majesty's Government has now started the CRAG process following this 6-month scrutiny period. This was in addition to the statutory period provided for by CRAG. By the end of the CRAG period on the 20th of July, the treaty would have been under the scrutiny of this House for over 7 months. The House will undoubtedly have benefited from reports from 3 separate select committees: the International Trade Committee, the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, and the International Agreements Committee in the other place. In addition, the agreement can only be ratified once Parliament has scrutinised and has passed the implementing legislation in the usual way, and that agreement requires primary legislation, so the Trade Australia and New Zealand Bill is currently before the House of Commons and will have its second reading in due course. This legislation will be fully scrutinised and approved by Parliament in the usual way. Mr. Speaker, I should point out that we expect Australia to conclude its parliamentary process before we do. Therefore, any delay to our process slows the deal's economic benefits from being felt across Britain. And let me say this to my honourable friend. He knows that my brief usually covers other markets, but the principles remain the same. In my view, it is important to strike the right balance between the scrutiny of trade deals and bringing them into effect in a timely way, so that our consumers and businesses can reap the full rewards. I believe that the balance is right, and that this House and my department should continue to harness the power of trade to create jobs, boost wages and secure prosperity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this UQ on the Australia Free Trade Agreement. And I should start by saying this UQ is supported by the whole of the International Trade Committee and the chair of the Select Committee, who cannot be with us, but he is here in the guise of his favourite Scottish export, of course, whisky, spirit. But both the chairman of the Select Committee and I have very different perspectives about the Australia Free Trade Agreement. But despite that, we both wholeheartedly believe in the need for scrutiny in this place of that agreement. This is, Mr. Speaker, the first trade agreement, the first whole new trade agreement we have signed since leaving the European Union. But unfortunately, we have not had the scrutiny we deserve. Mr. Speaker, the then Trade Secretary, now Foreign Secretary, on the 8th of October, said we will have a world-leading scrutiny process comparable with Australia, New Zealand, Canada and Japan. That will mean the International Trade Committee scrutinising a signed version of the deal and producing a report to Parliament. A debate then taking place, and through the CRAG process, Parliament can block any trade deal if it is not happy with it. I ask the Minister, Are they still committed to that point of principle? Because it has been said by the member for Chelsea and Fulham, it has been said by the member for Banbury, it has been said by the now Secretary of State for Trade. These are commitments that were made to this House, to right honourable and honourable members, and we deserve our say on a trade agreement that makes a significant difference. Because in relation, Mr. Speaker, to the Australia Free Trade Agreement, the government began the 21-day CRAG process before the International Trade Committee had even produced its report, and even before the Secretary of State had come before us to defend that agreement in the first place. The government refused to grant the ITC's request for 15 sitting days before publication of Section 42 and triggering CRAG, thus denying us more scrutiny. The government has failed to provide a minister, as I've already said, in good time and good order. And I might just make out that in the first report the committee wrote on this, the Secretary of State was asked 8 times to come before the International Trade Committee to discuss this agreement. She only did so a week and a half ago. They have failed to provide a debate and a vote on this agreement, and so I ask, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister, will he, as the Liaison Committee and many other members across this House have asked, delay ratification for the further 21 days and allow us to have a proper debate on this issue? Will he ensure that every future free trade agreement is signed and is drawn through the CRAG process, as you have suggested is done so as well, Mr. Speaker? And will you ensure that ministers are made available to discuss trade agreements ahead of time? We are asking for nothing, Minister, that we have not been promised at the dispatch box. It is time we are given that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we do have a system that actually compares very well with other parliamentary systems around the world. And I can tell my honourable friend that we will not be extending the CRAG period, given the extensive scrutiny time that Parliament has had, as I set out earlier, 7 months by the end of the period. And we won't be able to offer a debate. The Secretary of State did say that she felt the agreement could benefit from a general debate, but that is a matter for business managers in this House. I know that the party opposite was very keen to have another debate yesterday, which of course took a whole day of parliamentary business from this House. And in terms of the Section 42 report, which is intended to inform the scrutiny period, it's there to inform it, not create an additional scrutiny period above and beyond CRAG. Now, we published that report on the 6th of June. It was sent, as the honourable gentleman says, to the ITC, to the EFRA committee, and to the IAC and the other place on the 27th of May to make sure that they had ample time to consider the report. There is a balance, as I say, between ensuring there is sufficient time for robust scrutiny and making sure that the agreements come into place quickly, and I think we've got that balance right. And, Mr. Speaker, on CRAG, the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act was introduced by the party opposite. It gave the opportunity for parliamentary disapproval of treaties statutory effect, and it gave the House of Commons a power to block ratification. Members across this House will know the answer to that. I'm more than willing, Mr. Speaker, to set out the process, but in the interest of time and allowing people to come in, I shall sit down for now.